Hi, welcome back to my art channel. I'm G, and in this video I'm showing you how to paint some spring blossoms using Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils. So my first step is to get my reference photo and to draw out the flowers onto some 300 GSM hot pressed Bockingford watercolor paper. And here's a quick sneak peek at the 6 watercolor pencils I'm going to be using from the Faber Castell set of 24. And after I soften up the line work with an eraser, it's time for me to get started on that very first blossom. The very first colour that I use is a pale blue, a light ultramarine. And if you look at the reference photo on the side there, you can see that these flowers are very pale, a kind of mixture of almost bluey grey and some pink. And I want to sort of push them towards a slightly bluer bit because grey is not a very good fun kind of colour to use to do flowers. So you can see me using, first of all, that light ultramarine, and then this Helioblue Reddish, which is a slightly darker blue, which I was hoping would give me a little bit more shadow in some of those deeper kind of blue areas. I'm working in quite a small area to begin with, so you can see me using quite a small pointed round brush. This is a size 3 sable brush by Winsor & Newton, and that is really good for doing these very small bits to begin with. You should know by now that I like to start with a small area to build my confidence before I go on to those bigger areas and bigger petals. And next you can see me adding a red, pale Geranium Lake. Now this is the kind of lightest red that is in the Faber Castell set of 24, and so I'm using it super lightly. I'm almost just letting it brush gently over the surface of the paper, because if you press down too much you get quite a large swash of red there, and it's going to just completely overbalance the picture straight away. So I'm being super careful when you see me add that pale Geranium Lake. I'm using it very sparingly. Coincidentally, pale Geranium Lake is the same colour that I used to actually draw this out on the watercolour paper. When I lightboxed my original sketch, I used pale Geranium Lake to do all the line work, and I realised that it was such a hefty red, a strong red, that it was probably going to overpower everything. So I took an eraser to all the line work, and that's why the lines you can see me trying to work around here are really faint. You might be looking at this right now and thinking, that's beginning to look very blue, but please don't worry. If you see my original color test before I actually started this, you can see it is a lot more blue. So I realized I was going to have to tone that down a little bit by using the pale Geranium Lake to get a slightly pinky quality, but also just by being really sparing with the blue color. Now this section is the last section that I do before I go a bit more time-lapsey with the rest of the video. And here I was trying to make it a darker, kind of more shadowed area. So I put down the light ultramarine first, then I follow that up with Helioblue Reddish. But I am aware that it might look just a bit too blue. So you can see me gently adding some of this pale Geranium Lake on top here, so that hopefully when I get the water on with the brush and I blend everything together, it will have a, light pinky blue purpley type of look rather than just full-on blue. If it's full-on blue, I'm gonna have to make some changes and perhaps put an extra layer of color on afterwards, which I might have to do anyway looking at it, and I know that I might have to deepen and darken those shadows a bit more. So these early parts of the first blossom are really about laying down areas of color, putting in some very light shadow, and leaving some of those highlights. I want to do it watercolor styly, so I want to leave highlights as paper white where I can, but the rest of it is just putting in light areas. So I'm getting a feel for where my shadow areas are, and you'll see me as I'm going along and doing some of the larger petals, adding some extra little bits of color to bits I've already done, just gradually putting in those little changes as we go along. Now this one was one of the first big petals I did, and I stuck with the size 3 brush, and I found it very difficult to do that, to blend the colors together, and it looked a little bit too streaky. You might agree looking at it. And it also ended up looking too blue. So I realized I was relying a bit too much on the Helioblue Reddish, and I decided to let that take a backseat and use a lot more of the light ultramarine in sort of tandem with the pale Geranium Lake. So for this section, you see me put down the pencil, and then I switch from a size 3 to, there you go, the size 6 sable brush, which is loaded up with a lot more water, and I can plonk a lot more water onto the paper, swish it around, blend the colors that are there faster, more easily, and cover a larger petal, a larger area much more quickly. I think the next few stages of the painting show that I started to get a bit more confident with the pale Geranium Lake, less intimidated, less scared of using it. And you can see me putting this down with the light ultramarine and getting a slightly better blend of these colors. And perhaps less blue than what I'd done so far. So I think this marks a sort of part in the painting where I start to get a bit more confident with the pinks, and I transition a little bit to a slightly different blend of colors that you can see, and using the size 6 brush a lot more as well, so I could work quickly with a lot of water but also leaving some of those lovely white areas, so I'm getting some nice creases and folds in the petals that you can see where the light's really striking it, and I'm just learning to leave those and blend the colors around those particular areas. I think it just goes to show that even with color tests and planning these things as much as you possibly can, unless you did an actual full version of this, first of all, with the colors you're going to use, there's always going to be little things that surprise you, little changes, little tweaks, sometimes big changes, sometimes big tweaks, that you have to make as you're working your way through a painting. And while I was a bit annoyed at the amount of blue that I'd used so far, and I liked the slightly pinker petals that you can see, I just had to make my peace with that and realize that at least I'd managed to make that change halfway through the picture, and I could apply that when I started to move on to the second blossom. So here you can see me being a lot bolder with my use of the blue and the red together, because these are the buds, the flower buds that haven't opened yet. And also I start to be able to use dark chrome yellow and also earth green yellowish on the leaves and the bits that surround those bits of blossom before they've actually opened up. Now the buds actually have a lot more color, more saturated color before they actually open up, fully open up. And that's what you can see me tackling here. This is one of the buds that is opening gently. So it's actually a lot more pink, and it's going to lose quite a bit of this color when it's fully open and it's in the sun, and it's going to look more white than pink. But at this stage, it gave me the opportunity to put in some nice pale Geranium Lake and adding some of the blue areas using the light ultramarine, and even the central section I'm putting in green and red together, and that's why the very center bits, which are a little bit darker and completely enclosed, look a bit brown, because I'm using basically a green and red mix in there just to try and make it a bit darker so it's got a bit of depth. You can also see that I'm leaving the white areas on that bud, on those petals, completely paper white. I'm not messing with those, so you get a really nice strong contrast between the dark colored areas I've done and the bright white bits. Now, going into the second blossom, I had a much clearer idea on the colors that I was going to use. So you can see me laying down some pretty pale washes of the light ultramarine together with the pale Geranium Lake. So I'm using the two together, and I know I'm not going too dark at this stage, and what you will see me do here is lay down these light layers first of all, and then gradually build those up by putting more color on once it had dried, and then using the brush and the water to blend and saturate and move those colors around. So gradually layering and building up the shadow areas and also the color to get some of those areas a little bit more richly colored on this second blossom, because I've just got a much clearer idea and kind of like more confident, right, I know what I'm doing now, I know what I want it to look like. Now, if you're looking at the center of the blossom and thinking, why is it leaving that kind of white octopus shape in the middle? That's because that is the area where you've got all the little stamen and pollen bits all kind of like sprouting and curling outwards, almost cup-shaped. And I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to deal with that yet. So what I did was think, right, I'll just leave a space. And then when I do come back to that afterwards, probably one of the last details I do, I can put the colors in carefully then and work around them if I need to make stuff darker. So here you can see me moving on to more of the green leaves and more of the blossoms. And you can see I'm just more confident with the color by now. I'm putting on reds, I'm putting on blues. I'm even coming back with a little bit of the Helioblue reddish, so that these blossoms really stand out nicely. And the kind of green leaves that kind of are just curving around them have some really nice strong white highlights on. It's the benefit of taking your reference photos on a really sunny day. So you've got some lovely bright sharp highlights on everything and then some colors on the rest. Now you can see me start to work into the background. So I'm putting in colour into the background. I'm putting in a mixture of green and yellow and brown. I'm starting to use brown for the first time, so I'm using a walnut brown from the set. And I'm not being fussy about the way that I blend those colours together. I'm just slapping them into the background, and then I'm putting the water on and I'm blending them together. And I'm letting them run together. I'm letting them be a little bit fuzzy and a little bit expressive and a little bit diffuse, because I want the background to look like that. I want the crispness of the flowers in the foreground to really pop out at you, and the background, everything that's really going on there, to be a lot paler and fuzzier. So you can see me putting on those colors quite roughly and then just kind of blending them together with big size 6 brush with lots of water on. And I'm also allowing some of the brush strokes, the pencil strokes, sorry, to show. So when I'm blending stuff together, if some of those watercolor pencil strokes are still visible in the background, I quite like that because it's quite a contrast to the way that I've done the petals on the flower. So instead of me being my usual fussy self and thinking, no, I've got to totally blend out those pencil marks, I can't leave those pencil marks, I'm actually okay at leaving them this time around and letting them be a part of the picture. Now, I quite like the way it ends up looking, but you'll have to let me know in the comments below whether you're like, ooh, no, you should have totally blended out those pencil marks, they look funny in the background, or whether you're like me and you're like, oh, I quite like the contrast in the different textures that you've got going on there. I hope it's the latter, but like I said, drop me a comment and let me know what you think. Now there are 2 sets of colours you can see me using in the background. For the greens in the background, I'm using the earthy green Yellowish, but I'm also using parts of the light ultramarine in there as well, and some of the dark yellow chrome, just for where some of the sunlight is hitting some of those green areas. And I'm blending those together. With the twigs and the stems, you can see me putting down a base of the walnut brown, and then on top of that, adding some of the pale Geranium Lake in places, and also a little bit of the light ultramarine in places too. I was kind of conscious that I just introduced walnut brown, and it didn't really have a link in any way to the foreground flowers, so I thought the best way for the whole picture to maybe have an overall good feel is to include some of the colours that I'd used on the blossoms on top of the walnut brown on the stems in the background. So that's what you can see me doing, adding a combo of all of those colours and then getting that lovely big fat size 6 with the water on and blending those colours together. And here you can see me going back over them. This is like a second layer. I wasn't sure that I'd done them dark enough because I really wanted them to be dark so that the flowers would stand out. So I went back in and I put a second layer of some of these colors on just parts of the picture. Some of the green areas like you can see there, but also some of the background brown areas as well. So they would be deeper and darker. Just more of a contrast so that hopefully the blossoms are really going to pop and come forwards. Now that I was happy with the background, it was time to start building my confidence towards the point where I was doing the little stamen and the polleny bits inside the blossoms. So you can see me going back in and working on some of the petals here, trying to balance out what worked on the second blossom a bit more over the top of what I'd done on this first blossom. So taking down some of those stronger blues and making them a slightly more light pinky kind of purple in places was what I was trying to do here. Then I'm in with the dark chrome yellow, putting in little blobs of that, and then just darken them gently with the green and some tiny bits of blue as well, just so they're not a bright yellow, they're more a slightly dull yellow because they're still in the center of the flower, so they're still in slightly shadowed areas. And then you see me just use the light ultramarine and the pale Geranium Lake to just darken some of those areas next to the stamen, so that you can see the stamen stand out a little bit, see those little white stalks curving outwards and upwards. So it went okay with those first 2 and I was kind of happy with those, but I knew that the second blossom was a bit more complicated in the middle. So here you can see me adding a lot more of the polleny bits and also some green in that background, and I was a bit like, oh, that green had a bit of blue, it's still looking really green. So after I'd done my initial pass of colors using the yellows and the green, I then decided I'm going to put some pale Geranium Lake and a bit of blue on top of that green and blend that in so that it's going to look a little bit more earthy and a little bit more muted in the background, so that green wasn't quite so bright. It's a real sap green at the moment, so I was hoping that a bit of the red and the blue would take it down. And there it is, finished for now. I can't guarantee I won't tweak some bits later because I think I kind of bit off more than I could chew with this painting. But let me know what you thought in the comments below, and please check out some of my previous videos. And thank you so much for watching.